Trauma and women. Do we as women relate differently to trauma than men? And if so, why? Does it come down to our genetics? Well, these are the exact questions I asked our guest today on the Girlfriend Doctor show. And I want to introduce to you today Kashif Khan. He is the president and founder of the company, the DNA company. He's also a TEDx speaker and president and uh, he's also a TEDx speaker and recognize that where personalized medicine is being pioneered, we need to look at genetics, right? It is not a one size fit all, and it truly is. We are an N of one. So, in his work and his research, he dug into genetics, and through that came the results and the reportings of his DNA research and the creation of the DNA company. He's also the host of the Unpilled podcast and author of The DNA Way with a foreword by Dave Asprey. He grew up in Vancouver, Canada, in an immigrant household and developed an industrious entrepreneurial spirit from a young age. Prior to his tenure at the DNA company, Kashif advised a number of high growth startups in a variety of industries. As Kashif dove into the field of functional genomics, it was revealed that his neural wiring was, in fact, genetically designed to be entrepreneurial. However, his genes also revealed a particular sensitivity to pollutants. So, seeing his health from a new lens, Kashif dove further and further into this and started to see genetic pathways that led to his own family's health challenges and the opportunities to reverse chronic disease. His measure of success is not in dollars, but in lives improved. So I'm excited to share this with you today and looking at the hereditary aspects of how we relate to the world, how our genetics, how our health, and how our connections are affected. So join me in welcoming Kashif Khan to the Girlfriend Doctor Show. Well, welcome, Cash, to the Girlfriend Doctor Show. It's great to have you here.
It's awesome to be here. A long time in making. Well, now it's here.
I know, I know. We've crossed paths for many, many years, and I've loved to see how you've developed. I'm a big fan of your Instagram. You guys got to check out Kashif Khan's Instagram, and we'll put links in the show notes. But so much good information. As I was telling you beforehand, your video on why we eat with our hands,
Yeah,
why that can help us is was like, and I grew up culturally eating tabbouleh with the lettuce,
right.
eating the hummus and baba ganoush with the bread, and so I would love for you just to kick off with that discussion, and then we'll get into the genetics.
Yeah, the body is the more you explore, the more you find. It is like infinitely fascinating in terms of the perfection of how we were designed that we take for granted that we don't even understand. As soon as your fingers touch that food, digestive processes start, metabolic processes start, because that's what our ancestors did for not hundreds of years, not thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. Our DNA hasn't changed in a quarter million years. So the vast majority of our biological instruction is assuming we still have those old habits, right? So even that one little tweak, and there's so many little tweaks, and this is why I like to post this stuff on Instagram because it's little nuggets of wisdom that each one layered on top of each other changes your life.
That is so true. So, like we say, digestion starts in our mouth, but actually, that's not true.
That's correct. Yeah, it's meant to start with the actual act of touching the food.
That is awesome. Well, give us a little background on you and why genetics has become so important in your life.
So it saved my life. It wasn't the only tool, but it was part of what made me healthy. I actually don't come from the space, not a practitioner, not a scientist. I ran a sort of tech startup company where I helped technology companies grow in their marketing, in their reach, whatever they needed. And I got pretty sick. I had horrible eczema all over my body. My face was bad. I was like literally swollen and sealed shut. Gut issues, migraines, depression. The list can keep going depending how much time we have, but it was not good. And by the way, that was the first time I ever needed a doctor. And that was the first time that I learned what doctors actually do. And not people like yourself who think more functionally, but the allopathic clinician that diagnoses and prescribes. And when I asked why, like this stuff can't be serendipitous, all these things all at the same time. Like, what did I eat? What did I do? What am I missing as a nutrient? Couldn't get those answers. That led me down this rabbit hole of traditional Chinese medicine, naturopathy, homeopathy, all these root cause modalities. And when I landed on my genetics, And I finally saw that it was completely messed up, broken, and not instructing my biology properly. Then it started to make sense that I don't have these things. Me, my family, my business partner who had the same habits, I wasn't wired for those habits. And they're making me sick. And I'm no longer sick because now I know what my habits are supposed to be. And so I literally walked away from my business, gave it to my business partner, said I found what I need to prioritize and work on. And I built a research company. And since then, many tens of thousands of people's lives have been changed.
I love that. Was it your genetics or the epigenetics? Was it
So
the
both.
yeah,
And this is that whole argument. Okay, genetics, we need to figure this out. Epigenetics is all it is, and genetics don't matter. It's both. Meaning,
right.
what is the right epigenetic choice if you don't know the wiring? It's kind of like saying, here's a Ferrari. Is it good? Well, it depends. Are you racing it on a track or are you taking it off road in the mud? One result is going to be great, one's going to be horrible. Same thing with the SUV or a Jeep. Put it on the track versus the mud. So, what is your human design? What did your ancestors do? What traits did you inherit? And what are you actually doing with that design? The combination of the epigenetics and the genetics equals the net result. And you need to know both.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Now, what about the genetics of our microbiome?
So yeah, we started to learn that single genes don't have single meanings, right? And so in as much as we can sequence our microbiome, your microbiome changes so fast that if you do 3 tests in a month, you might get 3 different results, which are all useful and will guide you to what you need to work on. But we also know that there's genetics of how we actually regulate our microbiome. And maybe that becomes a priority or not a priority, and you move on to something else. There's genetics around your gut health. And by the way, this was one of the big aha moments for me that actually changed my life. There's a gene called GSTM1, which is a primary instructor of glutathione activity in your gut. And it's possible to have something called a copy number variation. It's a type of variation where you don't even have the gene missing. So my human instruction manual, my DNA, this page doesn't exist, right? And so this is actually one of the big things that made me sick is that speaking of Middle Eastern background, me and my business partner used to go to this Lebanese restaurant for lunch almost 4 or 5 days a week, literally most of the week. And I was eating hummus almost every day, which seemingly was harmless, didn't make him sick. But in Canada, where I live, there's chemicals allowed to be used in farming to dry things faster, to store them longer, because we have long winters, right? And this
Mm-hmm.
chemical that's used in chickpeas to dry them, my gut couldn't detoxify. So it led to a completely dysbiotic, inflamed, leaky, damaged state that made me sick head to toe. My business partner has an extra copy of this gene. And this is where, is it genetics or is it epigenetics? Yeah, this stuff is bad for you, but if you have good genetics and you can detoxify it, it's not going to matter. If you're like
Mm-hmm.
me, it's the thing will literally prevent you from going to work because you're fried and burnt out. So one simple example, but yes, there's so much more to the gut than just the microbiome.
Yeah, I think it's been fascinating. It's been a fascinating area of study, and especially, as it comes to immune health, right? Our immune system health and post-pandemic. Again, before we started recording, I was saying, practicing in the post-pandemic world is very different than in pre-pandemic. And it includes really focusing on autoimmunity issues, viral, issues, et cetera. And that wasn't really a big part of my practice in the past. And of course, always environmental medicine. Now more than ever, that component and looking at the combination between genetics and the environment and how our body is handling the sometimes the toxic burden, and
Yeah.
again why other people can seemingly not have any issues.
Yeah, we're not the same. We're bio-individual. And you do have a different reality now. You have 144,000 chemicals that have been added to humanity since the 1970s.
Yeah.
So it's not grandma's reality anymore. It's not good enough, whatever the old habits were. I can do whatever I want, and then when I break something, the doctor will fix me. You're probably already on the path of being broken, just given the toxic soup you live in. So the
Or
main,
you were born in
or
197
even more.
chemicals in the
Yes.
umbilical cord blood, right?
Exactly. Microplastics, everything being found in the umbilical cord. So it's starting in the womb, right? Unfortunately. And so now, not to be a Debbie Downer and create all this
Yeah,
doom and
no.
gloom, it's more about what does health mean today? Health doesn't mean if I get sick, I need to deal with it. Health means there's so much to deal with. I need a maintenance plan now to make sure it doesn't happen. right? And
Right.
what is that maintenance plan? It could be so many different things. That's where you would use genetics to determine what is the big red flag, what gene doesn't work. What is it? Is it chemicals? Is it airborne? You know Dr. Tom O'Brien, right? Uh,
Yes.
so he was talking about, well, I interviewed him once for this summit, and he was saying that he believes that 66% of dementia is airborne. Not that it's a virus, but that we're breathing so much pollution and our indoor air quality is so heavily saturated with fragrances and, from your laundry detergent to your personal care products, that's what's causing the neural inflammation in a lot of people. But why
Mm,
66%? Because some people have really good genetics around glutathione activity in the respiratory system. And the same threat doesn't mean much to them. Some people have really bad genetics here, and it means a lot. Walk into the cosmetics section of a store and you feel gross and a headache. And so what is the priority, given that there's so many things we need to do? Dwindle it down to what your body actually needs.
right. Honoring the genetics that created us, like to
Yes.
honor. And I always, one area of specifics that's fascinating to me is polycystic ovarian syndrome,
Mm.
which, has been coined so in the US as basically you have acne genes, fat genes, infertility genes, right? When in
Yep.
fact, these are survivor genes. These are
Exactly.
Amazonian warrior genes. These are like, I mean, these are powerful. I say to my young teens, depending on their ethnicity, Pocahontas genes or Mulan genes or
Yeah.
whatever. These are powerful genetics that we have to shift our environment to really optimize our genetics. So,
Yeah,
um,
there's a gene called SRD5A2 that will take your healthy androgens, your testosterone, and convert it into dihydrotestosterone. That
yep,
super potent, 16 times more potent version, right? And if that's how you're wired, like Pocahontas, right, and you're meant to be lean and mean, but you don't do the work that you were wired for, then this stuff accumulates. They're molecules that you don't just pee out, they cause inflammation. And then there's certain detox processes that we know are responsible for each one of these hormone metabolites, and those might also not be working so well. So you have this ultimate human design of you are meant to be working your muscle till exhaustion. You give this God-given gift of being able to do that job, but you didn't know, and you're doing something else, and now all of a sudden hair loss, acne, cysts on your ovaries.
yep,
Because this stuff is now
yep.
called what was meant to be a superpower is now your burden. And it's often the case, even with words like anxiety and depression, those words are happening because you have wiring up here that's a superpower, but your context is making it feel like a burden.
Yeah, and I definitely want to hit on that. And I wanted to share a quick story about PCOS too, because, given this approach that I've had, I was interviewed by a journalist who had reached out to me to talk to her about PCOS and treatments, et cetera. When I shared with her my approach, I'm like, you're designed to build muscle, you're designed to be a leader, you can multitask like nobody's business, right? And you can focus. You're like that strength, that high, that really high capacity individual. And so she just started crying because
Yeah.
she'd been led to, she always built muscle and was always gaining weight. And she had been led to really curse her genetics, right? To curse how she was designed instead of bless it. So really shifted her perspective. And I think that's so important to look at, like, especially as I, review genetic tests with patients all the time. It's a key aspect of fine tuning and optimizing longevity that we look at this in the right context. And sometimes you get all these, red flag, depending on the lab test, you get these red flag genetics. And you're like, wait, what were they designed to do? How can we empower them so that they're working in a healthy way? So, we're going to talk about that in a minute as we go into genetics. But one big thing that I did want to address, especially post COVID, is that, often women can be stuck in trauma. And
Mm.
especially now with long haul COVID and post pandemic and a lot of issues going on. But, can you offer some insight into this area from the genetic perspective too?
So there isn't one single path, there's many. There's reasons why this feeling of burden, trauma, avoidance behavior is hardwired into some people. And yes, post when you go through something as significant and as long duration where you've lost control, as what we went through with lockdowns and COVID, and you're wired to be the protector and provider, and the neurochemical activity that was meant to be sort of short term as an acute response that lingers for 2 years equals an imprint of trauma. And so, by the way, you're wired for this. I can tell you.
Oh,
But in your
I was wondering, wait, back up. Tell me again.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so for my audience, I did my genetics with the DNA company, but I don't have the results yet. They're not released for me yet, but you know,
Well,
he's
yeah.
got
So
an in somehow, and so
I've
he
hacked
pulled mine up.
yeah, hacked your DNA, and I can tell you that so what happens when you're experiencing a significant negative stimulus? Your body surges something called adrenaline. And adrenaline is this changes all your biology to give you everything you need in that moment to be able to deal with that significant stimulus. But it also does something else, which is it creates an imprint, a memory. Remember, our DNA, like I said, 250,000 years old, our cave people ancestors didn't have a lot of problems. They played with their children, milked the buffalo, plucked some plants out of the ground, told stories. Once in a while, there was something that they needed to remember. Waking up in 2024, you know you're waking up to problems every day, different reality, right? And so now this chronic imprint, this chronic response to everyday stressors, when you have dysregulation in adrenaline genetics, you surge and can't control the volume of adrenaline. And so not only does it create an intellectual imprint where I remember this and I'm going to avoid it, it also creates an emotional imprint where the next time you are reminded, you see the person, you see the frown, you see the location, the feeling comes back as if it's happening again. It's a continuation. Now, if you combine this, sorry, with estrogen dominance, which is where a lot of women are sitting, then all of a sudden you start to experience, I'm already wired to be the warrior, not the warrior. I'm wired to protect, right? To have an engaged nervous system and look out for problems and protect the tribe. And then add on top of that this emotional imprint that you keep getting reminded on the news of what's wrong, what's wrong, what's wrong, and you don't know the end of it and you've lost control. It can lead to this state, this fight or flight state, which a lot of women are stuck in. Another layer to this, serotonin. Serotonin is this mood regulating neurochemical, right? So it's meant to allow you to respond appropriately for whatever just happened. And if it's dysregulated, it's not just mood. Mood is the outcome, but the mechanism is your brain can't prioritize stimulus. That's actually what's going on. So when we're sitting here chatting, if I start chewing something, if I start scratching my face, it's like, what's this guy talking about health and he has a disease on his face? Some people can't focus. And what appears to be ADHD, attention deficit, it's actually hyperattention. You're seeing the world at an elevated level of detail versus your peers, right? Now add that to the story. I can tell you that the women that I'm working with directly, whether it's menopause, infertility, fibromyalgia, or just optimization, biohacking, with some level of certainty, when it's like I'm doing everything right and nothing's working, one or two or three of these things is going on in their brain. And the very first thing we need to resolve before fixing anything, hormones, cardiovascular, diet, is their nervous system.
Hmm.
Nervous system is fried, they're stuck in fight or flight, rest and recovery processes are shut off, their body's not trying to fix, it's trying to prioritize going to battle, blood in your fists, not blood in your organs, detoxifying and providing nutrition. And that state is the challenge. Throw all the supplements and nutrients you want, they're all going to bounce off because you're not ready to recover. So yeah, starting here is like creating the terrain that actually is willing to heal.
Starting in the brain, starting in the nervous system,
Yes.
start again and working to create that. So this is fascinating to me because I don't know what genetics you've seen on me yet, but for me, from trauma, from PTSD, PTSD causing infertility and early menopause and then being able to reverse it. Not, this is where I say it takes more than hormones to fix your hormones, but it was really addressing the cortisol oxytocin connection, which
Mm.
made the biggest impact in my life, in my physiology, and the hormonal connection. So I say, like, oxytocin is this overarching, queen hormone. And then
Yeah.
you have insulin and cortisol as key master regulating hormones. So I
Yeah.
wonder, like, that cortisol, serotonin, fighting that trauma
Mhm.
signaling. You, what
Yeah, so
advice do you have
definitely,
there?
if I look at your wiring, right, you're without ever speaking to you, I would say you're wired for anxiety and trauma, right? And now that being said, this is also your superpower. The reason why you do the brilliant work you do is because you're wired to filter and think through emotions, so you care. You have the empathy, you connect, you bond, people see that and feel you, right? You also have this, let's say, heightened awareness around detail. So when you're analyzing, the things that you see are beyond what you're taught. You're reading between the lines and interpreting things that you don't even supposed to interpret, right? Because that's where your brain goes. There's also your tryptophan pathway is a little dysregulated, which means everything I just said is layered with a little bit of a negative perspective in a very positive way. What does that mean? You're looking for problems. You walk into a room, that's
Totally.
supposed to be here. You're not supposed to be in this room. Hey, it's 5 o'clock. Weren't you supposed to leave? Right? Slow down, slow down. You're driving too fast. So your brain is always like, what's wrong? Which means you're wired for leadership. These traits, I care, I see all the details, I look for problems. I am wired to protect everybody. I'm wired to pull everybody forward, which is what you do, right? So
Uh,
but this exact same profile is who's saying, I need anxiety medication, I'm depressed, I can't get out of bed, I don't talk to my family, right? Depending on the context, you landed in the perfect context. Somebody else who went through abuse or went through a bad marriage or is eating the wrong foods and their gut is disrupted could very easily be talking a very different story, right?
well, and that's been me too. Like I completely resonate with, I know when I'm starting to slip into the pit
Mhm.
and I've got to do the practices and disciplines that keep me in a positive light, keep me in a positive mental atmosphere. So
Yeah,
it's definitely, a skill and a discipline to overcome those genetics for sure.
yeah. And another layer to your story, your dopamine pathway. So dopamine is this neurochemical that allows you to experience pleasure or reward. Ultimately, both of those things lead to satisfaction, right? And pleasure is more of an instant gratification. Reward is harder to get satisfaction from, but once you get it, it's more satisfying than pleasure. So people, you see these high-performing people that go down this reward path, and they fail and they become very depressed because they're
Mm.
relying now on pleasure, right? So having said that, you have this extreme high intensity of how you bind dopamine. So your ability to feel it is like, wow, this is great. Then there's genes that break the dopamine down and clear it and get it out of your head. And those are as slow as they could possibly be. So you're wired for two things. Well, three things. Contentment, things are good. I'm sad. I don't need it. I'm not excited by the opportunity. I'm good because it's so easy for me to feel and it lasts such a long time that I live in this bubble of contentment. I don't need.
Mm.
But it also speaks to anxiety, crazy anxiety, more of an acute anxiety because you're so used to things being up here. When the good that you're expected is taken away, you finally feel the bottom and you just can't tolerate it, right? Leads to an anxiety crash. What do you mean we're not going to that restaurant? What do you mean the vacation got canceled, right? Versus, oh, vacation canceled, I guess I'll schedule work again, right? Can't handle that drop. It also speaks to what some people might call procrastination, here's the list of 10 things to do. Anna did two of them really, really well, and eight never started. The deadline's Friday at 5 p.m., 4:45, she just gets started going on the thing she's not interested in. Why? Because you're content. So other people that have the opposite wiring are so reward seeking that they burn themselves out. So mental health wise, this is a very healthy place to be. But unless you become the specialist with the team that delegates the other eight, right? Very hard to succeed. So you in the team, constant frustration, constant clash with the people that are more reward seeking, constant, why didn't Anna do the job? I did do the job. What are you talking about? Not what we said we were going to do, right? So this is where finding who you are, that neural wiring, being in the right context, thrive. Wrong context, anxiety, burnout, procrastination, depression.
And then that's with that, developing the skills to work around those
Yes.
tendencies, right? And once you're aware, there's a saying that I always quote from Emory from our surgical department is that the eyes don't see what the mind don't know. So if you don't know it, you're never going to see it. You'll be like skirting the issues, but when you know it, you're like, okay, now I can prepare. Now I can understand. I'm not doomed. I just need to integrate helpful strategies that are going to help me. And I've got to go back to what you said about problem seeking or
Yeah.
identifying the problems and situations. That is nail on the head. That must be a very powerful gene. But it's also what makes me a good physician because I look at an
Yes.
individual and I see what problems are you at risk for 10, 20, 50 years from now.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's so fascinating. Like you said, it can be considered bad genetics or it could be your superpower. And I love that you said that. So, with these genetics, especially with the dopamine issue and that Like, what strategies with DNA 10 when you see this, what are other strategies or and I actually wanna hit on the ADHD topic for a second. So I'm very highly functional, probably, I don't know if I have genetics for that, but I definitely have kids that are. And I've been blaming their father for decades now. But, like, how and that is a very common problem in today, but I think the hyperactivity from the foods, the hormone disruptors, the
Yeah,
toxins, et cetera, are exacerbating that condition. Now, what can we do to overcome that if we do have a genetic predisposition? I would love for you
yeah.
to share about that.
Sure. And so you're first of all, exactly what you said, that there's the baseline and then there's also the context today, where between the foods and the stressors and the social media, it's drawing out behavior that we didn't see in previous generations, right? So there's both things to deal with. But in terms of ADHD, there's a couple areas where if your children did get it from you and not from dad, then here's what might be happening. What I just said about
I
the
will never
dopamine.
tell. I will never tell.
This episode may never air. Let's say that.
That's right.
So, the dopamine pathway, that contentment, picture the child where I told you to stop leaving your dirty socks on the floor. Yeah, don't worry, mom, I'll do it. And they still don't do it. I told you to stop leaving the dishes here. You know that the homework was due on Thursday. Why haven't you started yet? Right? Those types of conversations where it appears there's a lack of motivation, it appears that they don't care, it appears that they shake their head and say yes, but are actually saying no in their head. So what's going on is again contentment. There's no reward seeking need. And so when they drop socks are dropped on the floor, there's no anxiety around this is actually supposed to go there. So anxiety is also a useful tool. It drives you to do things, right? And when you're content, there's no what appears to be motivation. Now give that person what they truly enjoy, what they truly value, and they're lost. They do a far better job than they need to do. And they're wired to be a specialist. They're not wired to be a generalist. And if
Mm,
you don't know you're wiring and you're trying to be something else, it doesn't feel good, right? So that's one component. Serotonin dysregulation can prioritize stimulus, the thing we were saying earlier. Put that person who's wired to be the leader and draws everybody forward, that sees everything, hears everything, weather's changing, guys, time to go home, right? Now put them in the middle of a classroom where they're expected to act like they're in the middle and behave like everybody else. And when the teacher says something and they're able to read in between the lines, read the teacher's behavior and physical language far beyond what they're supposed to, it appears like ADHD. Why can't you pay attention? I'm not talking about that right now, right? Why aren't you focused? So, but it goes beyond neurochemicals. So we think about ADHD as a brain problem, but just like you said, there's other systems that can lead to your behavior changing. So take my son, for example. I was told by his teacher that he has ADHD. I said, no, he doesn't. And they said, yes, he does. He can't pay attention. I said, that's can't pay attention? Correct. Let's figure out why he doesn't have a disease that needs medicating.
mhm,
I wasn't looking for an ADHD gene. And this is, I think, the challenge with genetics. Genetics is this gene equals that. And it needs far more interpretation. It's more like, here's the problem. Now let's just find the broken biology, any broken biology. And how could that possibly lead to this outcome? It could be hormones, it could be your gut, it could be anything. Which thing doesn't work? And now how do we solve the problem? So what did I see in my son? TCF7L2, insulin regulation, the worst possible, right?
mm.
AMY1,
Predisposed to diabetes or
yes,
insulin
yes,
resistance, right?
insulin resistance. AMY1, amylase enzyme to break down starches, worst possible. So when it comes to carbs, starches, and those types of foods, he can't process them, literally puts him into a coma.
Mm,
Which
mhm.
teacher's complaining? The one after lunch. Where did he grow up?
Totally.
Yeah, he grew up in a South Asian home where he eats rice every day, right? So, so we had to learn that this child, and the same thing was happening in the evening at home. Temper tantrums, crashes, can't focus because he literally cognitively wasn't even there. He was experiencing this insulin spike, carb coma, trying to focus. And it looks like ADHD. It looks like you don't pay attention, you don't care. Why aren't you motivated? Really, it was a metabolic issue, and it was very temporary. So you learn, and you learn what is he actually supposed to eat? What can you add fibers and berberries and things of that nature? What time is he supposed to eat versus when he's supposed to do his work? And all of a sudden, he doesn't have ADHD anymore because he never did, right?
That's amazing. Yeah. Yeah, I believe it. What are the underlying issues that are causing those behavioral issues?
Yeah, and there's so much like you mentioned the gut, right? So myself, I am wired similar to you, except for the dopamine pathway, serotonin dysregulation, trauma imprinting, sort of Jack and Jill of all trades can take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. Negative perspective, looking for problems. This is why we're both kind of entrepreneurial in spirit. The difference is I have zero dopamine, you have too much. So we're both on extremes. So for you, it's like I'm a specialist. Let me do what I do. For me, it's like every shiny object I'm going to do, right? And I have to sort of control myself where you need structure to actually go do the stuff you're not doing. So, anyways, I say that because I was also told I have ADHD for a very different reason, which is I am reward seeking. I am entrepreneurial in spirit. I don't make enough dopamine, don't bind enough dopamine. I clear it way too fast. And so whatever's going on is never enough. Always need whatever I did yesterday accomplished, I need a bigger risk tomorrow, right? Never satisfied. Can't get no satisfaction. Literally that line from that song,
Well,
right?
there's the Hamilton song, like I will never be satisfied, something
Yeah.
like that in Hamilton. I totally resonated with that too.
Yeah. So I had to learn structure is very important. To answer your question, what do you do? We know there's supplements. We know there's cold plunging. We know there's L-theanine, there's GABA, there's things you can do. There's 5-HTP for serotonin. You can get choline and whole fruit coffee extract in your brain to drive neurogenesis and new neurons and feel more zen. But there's also just structure and knowing who you are. Between the two of us, you need all of your work that you know you're not going to do structured into micro deadlines. It's not,
Yes,
this is due on
totally.
Friday, right? You need, okay, this is due on Friday, but what needs to be true on Thursday? What needs to be true on Wednesday? And now you'll actually get it done without it feeling like anxiety, right?
Oh, like board exams every year?
Yeah.
Deadline.
Yeah.
Deadline.
Deadline. Yeah. Don't
You're not
start
going to
until
see
the
me for
deadline.
2 days because I put it off for entire 12
Yeah.
months. Yeah.
But what you need is to break that into micro. So 2 months out, what are you doing on that day and then that day and that day? And that doesn't feel bad. And I need the opposite because I'm so reward seeking. I actually need blinders on, which is how do I learn to say no? And in as much as seeking reward gives you satisfaction, there's also reward in saying no. There's also reward, and that's getting me closer to my goal. But you just have to learn to get your reward from doing that. It's just a new habit to adopt, right? And so
So,
that's what I've done.
with the hormonal changes throughout the month, like more dopamine at ovulation and the early luteal phase of your cycle, et cetera, like you know, how are your genetics? How are they triggered at different cycles for menstruating women?
Yeah. So what I find is if I sit with any woman at any given time of the month and we have this conversation, they will agree that's me, right? And why do I say that? Because yes, there's a circadian rhythm to hormones during the cycle. The delta value in how it makes you feel is not so significant that nobody would resonate on a certain day. It is who I am, but today am I a 2 out of 10 or am I an 8 out of 10?
Hmm.
That's kind of what it feels like, right? The anxiousness that I may feel, there's certain days where I really feel it, there's certain days where, you know what, I can tolerate a little bit more. That's kind of what it feels like. Your sort of neural map is known, but there's this sort of delta gap between 2 out of 10 and 8 out of 10 during different times of the month.
And does like going through menopause and being postmenopausal, that shift in hormones, uh, have an epigenetic consequence?
So everything I said about serotonin dysregulation, trauma, etc., not even menopause, even starting at perimenopause, anytime we meet a woman who's sort of 40 years old plus that comes in and says, well, my hair has problems. I had breast cancer 10 years ago. Now I have a bunion on my foot. I fixed the
Mhm.
bunion. I got a skin issue. I don't understand what's going on, but it doesn't matter what I eat, I gain weight. Like just the story stacking and stacking and stacking. Um, always serotonin dysregulation. I'm saying this like literally with certainty because it's always the case. Sometimes the trauma, but usually dopamine issues also. It's usually these two, serotonin and dopamine. So what's going on is your brain actually doesn't know what's going on. Your brain's relying on your thoughts. And when I say thoughts, I mean the conscious words in your head, the stories you tell yourself, the 40 million neural cells in your heart that think through the emotion that you experience, your gut, which has neural cells in this mini brain. For every one signal your brain sends down, your gut is sending eight back, telling your brain what's really going on right now. And your brain will believe your emotions and your instinct, and that's what it will actually act on. It will change your biology. So decade after decade of living in anxiousness, living in fight or flight, and convincing your body that you're in battle all the time, that's what it's going to do. And now you go and when it gets into perimenopause and menopause, this trait exaggerates itself. And all of a sudden, what went from I have hair loss and I have acne turns into fibromyalgia, chronic disease,
Hmm.
and fatigue and weight gain. And so it's like, why can't I lose weight? Because it's not a calorie issue, it's a cortisol issue.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so, yeah, and this goes back to what I said. We always start here. That tones things down, especially post 40, especially estrogen dominant, especially post COVID. Then we can actually work on whatever the problem is at hand.
No, I love that. And so with this discussion, Cash, do you feel like a masterclass, a genetic hormone masterclass coming? I mean, I really think this is an area that we can dig into, like how our genes are affecting us and affecting our hormones and our health. Like for longevity, genetic hacking is empowering. And it's also empowering when we look at these genetics, you know, when we're looking at certain aspects, if we're looking at stress management genetics or risk factors for detoxification, like for you the GSTM1 genetic predisposition to be have impaired glutathione or phase 2 detox key phase 2 detoxifier, like these areas, then you know, okay, I can micro target, I can really fine tune my lifestyle and my nutrition and my supplementation even more. And so when you combine that with some of the, you know, I would say the epigenetic studies, like looking at organic acids and your metabolite pathways and things like that. You can combine that to really fine tune and customize that precision. This is precision medicine at its finest.
Yeah, this is it where, that's where I started and what got me the best. But then there's other things I do. I mean, the red lights, the cold plunging, I play around with those things, but I know what my body wants me to do and needs me to do. So it's not a one size fits all trial and error. I hope this feels good. Right?
I have a quick question for you on that. Is there
Yeah.
genes that cold plunging is not good for?
Yeah.
I want
Yeah.
those genes, but I have a daughter that will be like at 40 degrees for like 5 minutes. She'll cold
Yeah.
plunge forever. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing this for 2 minutes and 30 seconds and I'm done.
So even though she might enjoy it, that doesn't mean it's good for her, right? And
Mm,
so there's a gene called UCP1 that is often known as a metabolic gene, like metabolic rate. But we know when we think about it functionally, it also regulates thermal regulation, so your body's ability to maintain its core temperature. And if you have suboptimal UCP1 genetics and you're cold plunging too frequently, once in a while, not going to hurt you, the stress response that it creates once again will trigger fight or flight and cortisol goes up and the exact opposite outcome. I want to burn fat, you're going to start to create fat. Your body's going to
mhm.
put fat on your belly because it thinks you're going to battle and a sword might stab you and it's trying to protect you from that. So yes, there's genetics and women that are more estrogen dominant. We find that women that are more estrogen dominant over time get into a more stressful mode from temperature dysregulation. It's not heat. Sauna doesn't seem to cause the problem. Cold causes the problem. Same thing with
Mhm.
fasting. This wave of intermittent fasting, yes, it's good if you're wired for it. When your metabolic rate is off and when you're more estrogenized, daily intermittent fasting is going to hurt you over time. I'm not saying don't fast. Maybe it's a once a month, 24-hour, 72-hour fast, as opposed to a daily intermittent. But if when you're more androgenized, a lot more testosterone, doesn't seem to matter as much. You actually thrive on it. So that bio-individual thinking, like who am I and what am I supposed to do and why am I stuck even though I'm doing everything right? Because you might not be doing it right for you, right? You're not that
Right.
type of person.
Right. And then again, you know, for women different than men, and based on, look at this based on our genetics and the hormonal milieu that we're living in. There's so much power in this information. I think that we really have to dial into. So, what would a hormone genetic masterclass look like with us? Let's just build this out right now. You guys, we
Yeah.
are totally seeding this. This will get on the calendar. Make sure you're following both of us. Follow Cash at what's your Instagram handle?
It's Cash Khan official. So KASHKHAN official. So that's where I am. You'll find a lot of information there. Let's just say that. Uh, Having said that, yeah, I think this is the way to do things because it's, anyone listening to this conversation will hear that. How do I get this from a report? Right? So genetics, remember that the tools are designed by scientists that think like scientists for scientists. They're building a report for scientists. They're not building a tool that allows you to discover who you are and know what to do. What should you know? Tell me every bit of biology that's broken. Just scan and tell me. Give me every recommendation so I know what to do that's personalized to me, but also teach me how to interpret this because the DNA I'm born with is the DNA I die with. It's not changing. So 5 years when there's new problems, new opportunities, I should be able to go back to this tool and ask new questions.
Mhm.
And that should be the outcome of using your genetics, not a single report that tells you very siloed information that is only relevant at that time, right? So yeah, I think a master class is the best way to do that. Because if somebody shows up with their DNA in their hand and we spend 7, 8, 9 hours together going through every single aspect and sort of building personalized plans with each person, when we know the focus is hormones and female health, my mind starts getting blown in terms of what the potential is there. But that is the best way to do things.
I'm excited. I'm excited. So, guys, stay tuned for your inbox. We'll be announcing something about this soon because this is, one-on-one when I work on patients, but be able to do this for a large body of patients together to be able to individualize care too is going to be a powerful understanding what these tests mean
Yeah.
and how to, and how to relate to it, not be terrified by it, but how to feel empowered. And I love how you switch that right at the beginning and say, okay, these are your superpowers as well. So
Yes.
again, tell our audience how to get a hold of you, and we will definitely be following up.
Yeah, find me on Instagram. That's where I do my daily rant about what's wrong in this world, you know. And my website is the same as my Instagram, cashconofficial.com. I built the DNA company. I don't run it anymore very intentionally because it's becoming a healthcare company. And I decided, what is my purpose? Why am I here? It's not to, work in hospitals. My purpose is to advocate, teach, do this, help people know that there's a different way, right? And so that's what I spend my time doing. And so, yeah, so my personal website and the Instagram, but I would say, my sort of feelers and tingly sensations are on prioritize and focus on the master class. Let's wait for that news. That's where your life can truly be changed.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today. I can't wait. I can't wait to get this started. So
Yeah.
all right, you guys, this was a great discussion. Really, genetics, epigenetics, it is what personalized medicine is all about. So I'm excited to just be able to offer you an upcoming masterclass on this topic. So we'll definitely let you know when that is. Be sure to stay and follow me at the Girlfriend Doctor. Make sure you're on our email list. That is how you will hear about it, as well as our SMS. And let me know what your questions are. What have you been struggling with? Is it your genetics? Is it your environment? What's going on and why? And it's always a combination of these above. And discovery is kind of very rewarding. And you have even untapped superpowers that you have yet to discover. Looking forward to next time. This is Dr. Anna Cabeca, and I love being your girlfriend doctor.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Girlfriend Doctor podcast. Check out all the links below for more.